Holy smokes, James Bender, Waypoint Survival. Welcome to the Wolfpack Podcast. It is so good to see you this morning.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Right on, right on. And you're joining us from Southern Ohio today.
Well, actually, today I'm in Southern Indiana.
Okay.
But I took a trip to see the family. So.
Oh, right on, right on. Well, family is important. So, a lot of people know you from YouTube, and you're kind of, in our estimation, a bit like the MacGyver of survivalists. But, that's not the only thing you do. So, Waypoint Survival, tell us a little bit about your company and what you are all about.
So I launched Waypoint Survival in 2017. I intended to do it many years earlier, probably, back in 2007, 8, 9, somewhere through there. But it was an issue of property, like places where I could actually do these projects. And we ended up in 2009 buying a property, very remote. I'm almost 1.5 miles off the pavement. And the GPS won't even get you to my house. So anyway, but we ended up with really great property to hold classes and all that. So it ended up being a few years later than I anticipated. But I've been a woodsman all my life. I grew up in Middle Tennessee. And from the time I was about 5 years old, spent a lot of time in the backcountry. So it's kind of some of my experience.
So you originally started then, if I'm getting this right, as instruction, as classes, that you'd invite folks to the property. And I know if you go to waypointsurvival.com, you can sign up for these things. You've got them going all the time. But is that the primary thing? And then how does the, call it YouTube instruction, the YouTube extension, work in conjunction with that? Because you do a lot of demos along the way, and I understand you being 1.5 miles off the property line or off the road, because you like fire. I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
You like.
I do.
And hopefully we'll get to see some of that a little bit later. But how does all that fit together?
Well, so I'm not really a pyromaniac. It's just that fire is one of the most important tools. It's fundamental to heat, for cooking your food, for boiling, purifying water, for hardening primitive tools, making pottery. Mm-hmm. Thousands of years, of course, of planetary experience with making and using fire. So whatever you can develop and use that will make that easier, or to contain it and to use it in a proper way. Of course, you always want to be safe with fire because, as has been said many times, fire is a wonderful slave, but a terrible master.
Yeah.
And so, as long as, or maybe servant would be a better word, but we want fire to do what we want. We want it to stay inside our fire ring, in our cook pit. We don't want it to burn down forests or fields or, drive out wildlife. So, obviously managing fire is a big deal. And it's very important to learn how to make it, how to continue to keep it going, and then to be able to start fires primitively if you need to, if you lose your lighter or matches or something.
Right on. Yeah, I noticed your mission was about teaching survival bushcraft skills using both ancient, primitive, and modern, your modern USB lighter, which I like to carry around with me.
Always carry a lighter. I carry a Bic lighter because you don't have to charge it anywhere. So the USB lighters are great, but once they run out of spark or electricity, then you can't use them. Whereas a Bic lighter, it will still have that little spark.
That's right.
And you can actually use, cotton lint off your socks, for instance, to make a primitive match. Sometimes it's called a prison match. Yep. They'll use those things. So you asked about the YouTube channel. I didn't get to that. The YouTube channel is a feeder. It's designed to feed into my classes.
Okay.
Years ago when I started it, I basically had no reputation as an outdoorsman, and it wasn't I was trying to, just boost my ego. But people won't come to you for classes until they have kind of a good sense of your skill level, your ability to teach. And so that was originally the idea of the YouTube channel, was to demonstrate and to teach. And I love inventing things. I like hacking things. Mm-hmm. I've always done that ever since I was a kid. Right. Try to come up with inexpensive ways to sometimes mimic more expensive products. Because I grew up without a lot of money. My family was kind of poor. And so what I say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Indeed.
So I came up with a lot of these ideas.
Right on. Yeah, you definitely do a great job. And just talking to you and watching your videos, you are a guy that has always got a smile on your face. You know, the way that you present yourself. I mean, what's not to love about James Bender? And, get to spend some time with you. How long are your classes typically?
So the phase one classes start at like 48 hours. And then they normally go up to like 60 hours. So I try to keep it between Thursday and Saturday. And for people, I have a lot of people that are faith-based. And so they like to be back for, their church on Sunday and things like that. So
yeah, you bet. So you talked about phase one. So do you have a curriculum then that people can advance? Okay.
Yeah, so I developed these are all mostly proprietary to me. So phase one is our basic. I call it a basic course, but a lot of people might find it a little advanced. It's usually challenging for just about everybody. So it's fire, water, shelter, food, signaling, navigation, and first aid. So those 7 basic survival priorities. And of course, there's an 8th survival priority, which is self-defense, but that's based on age and availability. And of course, that I always tell everybody get a qualified self-defense instructor if you want to do karate or judo or there's a lot of things you can go, firearms, knife, stick. There's a ton of that, and that's very specific to people's area. So I try to tell them because I don't focus on that. Then phase 2 is our advanced survival and bushcraft, and that's where we get into the friction fire. It's we go through food deprivation. You're only allowed to bring 3 energy bars for the class, and so or you can fish and forage.
We need to hook you up, get some nutrient survival, because I'll tell you, a couple of our bars might last you a week. I don't know.
Right, yeah. Right, and then phase 3 is our pioneer class. And that's where we teach how to cut down trees with axes using crosscut saws, how to square a log. So you go into these old barns and homes, you see,
nice.
The hand-hewn timbers.
Sure.
So that's what we teach.
Wow.
And I'm actually in the process right now of building a primitive 18th century cabin on my property.
Awesome.
And that figures in my 18th century series.
Okay.
Phase 4 is our primitive survival and bushcraft.
Okay.
And that's where we get into napping flint. One of the projects that people make and they'll take home with them is a stone knife that they've napped with their own hands.
Very cool.
And so, we live in a bark wigwam, and we all live. It's very communal. It's a very tribal experience. And so, So, and as the classes go up in phases, you have a lot of people go to phase 1, and then it tends to filter itself out as it goes up.
Sure.
Time you get to phase 4, which I have a class next week, actually, for phase 4, but it gets much smaller classes because, you're pretty intense into survival if you're going to go to that level.
Right. And so do you require folks to take the classes that lead up to the culminating class?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Each class builds on the last class.
Right.
The idea is we start off with a certain amount of tools and gear, and then we start taking away more and more stuff until you get to the primitive phase.
Right.
The idea being, of course, that, and I always tell them a little tongue in cheek, but that phase 4 is so that you can rebuild civilization with your bare hands if you need to.
There you go. Well, that's really interesting. And you talked about a lot of your folks that come are faith-based, and that's interesting. For sure. I am a Christian as well, and I hear that you also are a preacher.
Yes. I'm also a Christian, and I've been a pastor for almost 27 years.
When you talk about rebuilding civilization, a lot of people will probably laugh at you, and they laughed at Noah too, by the way, but probably laugh at you and say, "This is America. This is not going to be Mad Max. This is not going to be an apocalypse situation." And even the Bible says, I'm sure you know this one by heart, "Therefore I tell you," Matthew 6:25-34, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on." It goes on, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them." So somebody that's a smart aleck might say, "Well, what are you doing? Trust in the Lord, right?" So how do you think about that and address that for folks that say, "Don't worry," right? If you're really so faith-based, then how come you're so concerned about surviving in a primitive situation?
Right. Well, it's a very valid question. So I'll try to encapsulate it in a couple of ideas here. So first of all, America and a lot of Western countries are highly technologically specialized. I couldn't make a smartphone if you gave me all the pieces. I mean, I'm not even sure I would be able to put it all together if I had everything shipped to me in a box.
Right.
Okay. Because there's just a lot of things that go into that, much less make any of the components. There's a study from the 1950s on the manufacture of a lead pencil. And if you've never read that, it's really an eye-opening statement and the whole little story of all the manufacturing processes that come together to put a number 2 yellow pencil in your hand. And it makes you realize how dependent we are on massive amounts of people doing a very specific job. Yeah. And so I can, however, start a fire and write with charcoal. Mm-hmm. So that's a primitive way to make a writing tool that I can leave notes, and I can use a piece of bark for paper, a piece of skin or leather. There's various ways to make ink with berries. And anyway, so I get off base here. So
that's okay.
That's one thing that you can do. Right. But we are so highly specialized that if our country went into any kind, if there was some sort of an attack or a major economic shutdown where a lot of our factories closed, and we'll have electrical issues with the grid. There's been a lot of people concerned about that. But there are so many things that it would take months, if not years, to, for instance, if the electrical grid actually failed, there's about 300 of these massive transformers across the United States, and they transfer power from the power plants so that we can run it in our houses. So they're step-down transformers, and they're each one custom built to fit each of the power stations. We don't make them in the United States anymore. So they're shipped from overseas, and it takes 2 to 3 years to get one. So if something happened where there was a solar flare or an EMP attack, right, and it shut down those, even if everything in your house worked, our power stations would be backfed by all that electromagnetic energy. And it would take, they say it would be years, maybe a decade, if we ever got power back to the United States. So imagine trying to live for 10 years with no power at all. Right. Yeah. So those are the kind of things. I know those are extreme situations. We call them low probability, but very high risk. Right. So that's something you have to think about. And then as far as the Bible aspect of it, very few people think it's foolish to have a 401k or to save up money for retirement. And they're like, why would you need, freeze-dried food? Why would you need, a solar panel and a battery to charge, all this kind of stuff? God's going to take care of us. And of course, my answer is, well, why do you have a savings account? Just go spend all your money or give it to mission field, and let God take care of you. Right. And of course, they all think that's foolish because they say, well, I'm going to get old someday. I'm going to need money. My car's going to break down. Just trust the Lord. So again, that only works because most people, I have found, they're a little afraid. They start connecting the dots. If the power goes down, if I have to rebuild civilization or just protect my family, if we have to, farm our backyard to have food, it doesn't take long for people. They get really afraid of that. And of course, that's what we tell people, being prepared. It gets rid of all of those jitters. God told Noah to prepare the ark. Noah did it in faith. Jesus tells us in Matthew, and you go on to read, obviously from the Sermon on the Mount, which you quoted, but then if you go on to Matthew 24, Jesus said, see, I have warned you, I have told you before that these things were going to happen. So if Jesus says there's going to be wars, right, so there's going to be famines, there's going to be earthquakes, there's going to be diseases, we've already been warned in advance. And so I think it just makes, honestly, faith without works is dead. Mm-hmm. So if we believe that God tells us to do these things, that we are living in perilous times, and if we don't have some sort of preparation, then we actually are not acting on our faith. We are actually being presumptuous. We're presuming that God is going to take care of us, even though we haven't taken care of ourselves. So God's not going to just send me a check. I have to go to work. I have to do all the things that I have to do to reach people with the gospel, but also to make preparation for our families. That's it. No, I'm 100% with you. These are perilous times, and I don't think this is in the Bible, but you said it, the Lord helps those who help themselves, right? Right. And there's another guy, Rudy, the Alaska prepper. He likes to tell a story about somebody that's sitting there with the rain coming down, and they keep waiting for someone to come rescue them. And there's all these signs and whatnot, and they just pass them by like, no, I'm waiting for God to rescue me. And
And finally, the guy gets up to his neck and is covered with water and has no place to go. He's like, Lord, why didn't you save me? He's like, well, you missed the boat, you missed the helicopter, you missed the life raft, all this stuff. And so, what kind of sign do you need, right? So anyway, we need to absolutely take the initiative. And you can't expect a fish to jump up on the shore if you don't throw a line in the water, right? That's how you're going to catch that fish. They're not just going to come to you.
Right. Well, how many times does God have to tell us something before we take it seriously?
Yeah.
It really should only be once. And there are plenty of scriptures that warn us that during the last days before the return of Christ, we don't know how long that is. We don't have a date. Jesus said, no man knows the day or hour, but we know that there's going to be very serious times where we're going to be doing without some of the conveniences we've been used to. And so I think that I've told people this. I said, preparation is kind of like carrying an umbrella. If you look at the forecast, it says it's going to rain, but I have an umbrella with me, then I don't care if it rains because I'm prepared for it.
Yeah.
And so if I go in my local store and there's a shortage of green beans, but I went last week and I bought a flat of green beans, I got 12 cans sitting at home, then I don't really mind that there's not any at the store this week because it doesn't affect, my livelihood. So, my ability to feed my family.
That's it. Well, my pastor
or freeze dried food.
Thank you for the plug. The nutrient dense freeze dried food only at nutrientsurvival.com.
By the way, I used. Did you watch my bug out video where I bugged out from the city?
Yeah, I think it was fantastic. Thank you.
So I showcased a lot of nutrient survival in that one. So
we are the best, just like you. We are the best.
Those little packets are absolutely phenomenal for that kind of trip, for camping, backpacking. They're just perfect size.
Yeah.
So
this little single serves. Yeah, those were intended to be samples for our cans, and they certainly work for that because they give people a little bit of a taste of what they're going to get when they buy a full can or one of our our daily pouches that we also sell now for people that want to eat this stuff every day. I eat it every day. So for me, but anyway, these also turned into something, like you said, just perfect size to fit in your cargo pouch, throw in your purse, in your backpack, what have you. And it's, they're lightweight, they're super convenient, and it doesn't take a whole lot to, dip into them and get some great nourishment for the day, get you through.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My pastor talks a lot about the end times and how he thinks this, in his lifetime, we will see the end times. What do you think about that? I know you're not afraid of anything, but what do you think? What do you think is the biggest threat to our existence, the way that we know it today?
Well, that's a loaded question. There are a few things I'm afraid of. I'm not very fond of poisonous spiders and snakes.
We're cowboy boots.
That's right. But, I think that when it comes, and I've been a prophecy buff for most of my life as an adult, and have done a lot of intense studies on it. The greatest threat to civilization, honestly, is the wickedness of man. There's a lot of resources on our planet, but greed and agendas that are being run by supranational corporations, as well as some of your, just various things that we could come down from things like the United Nations or the World Economic Forum. There are a lot of things that are in play that they are designed to cause shortages. And so I honestly think that that's one of the greatest threats, and you're not going to stop it. I think sometimes we in the United States, we tend to be a little bit, even Christians, maybe especially Christians, tend to be a little bit blind to this. The Bible is very certain that these things will happen. And so, no matter how you vote, no matter who we put into office, and I vote, and I tell people, do the best you can. We should hold back the darkness as much as possible. But I do believe that ultimately, we will fail at that, and that there will come, a global, world government that is going to be very unfriendly, specifically to Jews and Christians. And but anybody that is conservatively minded or, is trying to bring in good government, There's just a lot of things on the horizon. I'm not really a conspiracy theorist. I wouldn't really call myself a prepper to that extent.
Yeah.
I consider myself a survival guy.
There you go.
And so I want to be able to make it through. And if I need to go through some tough times, my grandparents lived through the Depression, a lot of great stories. They experienced a lot of hardship, and so it's probably growing up on some of that kind of was my impetus as a young guy to get more interested in being self-reliant.
I think you're 100% right. There are agendas out there that, I'm just not smart enough to be able to spot them. But I know that they are out there, and ultimately people want to control you. And
right.
however they can do that, and whatever it takes, that continues to be a driving agenda across so many of these multinational, international, feel-good organizations. Mm-hmm. And you talk about low probability events like the grid going down for an extended
right.
period of time. But, I live out here in Nevada, out in Reno, and beautiful area. We're 4,500 feet and kind of a high desert, if you will, next to Tahoe. It's beautiful out here, but we're right next door to California. Mm-hmm. And California, you may have seen, declared or just passed legislation, I guess, in California, that by 2035, the entire state will ban gas vehicle sales and only electric. This was about 5 days ago they announced this, right? Governor Gavin Newsom, I call him knows nothing, instead of Newsom, knows nothing, said, hey, we are paving the way. And then just yesterday, they announced to the state of California, like, reduce your electrical usage, please. Turn your thermostats up to 80 degrees. Do not turn on the lights. Don't watch TV. It's going to put in a tremendous strain on the power grid. And please don't charge your cars above all else. So here it is, 5 days before everyone's going to drive an electric car by 2035. And 5 days later or 3 days later, don't charge them. So right. It's very real. The grid is not built for where we are and where we're going, and it's just ignorance around wanting one thing that sounds great or good. Who's going to argue with reduced carbon emissions? Nobody's going to argue with that, despite all the facts around what it takes to build electric vehicles. I actually drive an electric vehicle. I love it. It's because it's fast, not because it's saving any, the planet per se. Just it's fast. I love it. It's like a hypersonic go-kart. Just put your foot down on the pedal and you're gone. It's fun. Right. But that's the reason that I drive one, not because it's anything else. To tell you the truth, it's just really fast.
Did you know that in the 1930s, over 1/3 of the cars on the road in the U.S. were electric?
Really?
Yeah, there's lots of pictures of electric. New York City used to have charging stations all over the place. The problem is we found cheap oil, and it's much more energy dense, and so we switched from electric. But there was a lot of electric vehicles in the early part of our country, and we just abandoned the technology.
Right. So, right. Well, people move on, and hey. Yeah.
I think it's great, but charging the grid. You're right. I mean, some of the stuff that's happening right now is man-caused. It's kind of a man-caused disaster. Trying to keep certain organisms alive in the creeks and streams and rivers, and so they've been releasing water flows from dams and reservoirs. Right. And then you wake up and you're like, hey, in a water shortage. In the middle of a drought.
That's right.
And so, when the reservoirs were really full a couple of years ago, and all that water is just gone. So, and I keep up on some of that stuff as well, because I think it's fascinating. And it's one reason why we do what we do, to have freeze-dried food, because what's available now may not be available. I mean, imagine what freeze-dried food is going to cost 10 years from now, 15 years, 20 years from now, if we're still here. Right. It's going to be triple the price, if not more. Yep. So buy it now, 25-year shelf life. I think it's fantastic. So,
well, thank you. I didn't even pay you for that plug, but I appreciate it. I agree with you. So
I've been eating it for years, and camping and backpacking and all kinds of stuff. So
no, it's good. It's not the first thing a lot of people reach for dinner, but certainly having an assurance that you've got yourself covered, you've got your family covered. That's an important thing to be able to check off the list. And a lot of other things. So you became interested in bushcraft and survival space from your grandparents, and just kind of living in times where you need to make do with what you've got, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to go out into our garage and make my own knives and machetes and build shelters out in the woods. And I wasn't allowed to use fire much when I was a kid, just because, when you're a kid, you really shouldn't be playing around with fire. But, so yeah, we didn't know it was bushcraft back then. That's actually an Australian term that has kind of caught on globally. We just called it going on an adventure, and we go out in the woods and we'd be gone for hours. We'd be miles from home, out across the Tennessee landscape through the woods and the fields and the streams, and got turned around a couple of times. And but yeah, I mean, it was wonderful childhood. My parents chose not to have a television. So when I was growing up, and we didn't have air conditioning, my parents didn't get central air conditioning until I was in college. And so, I spent a lot of time outside. It's always 10 to 15 degrees cooler in the woods, just because of the trees. Of course, Tennessee is a very green state. And so you were out where it was more pleasant. But I grew up doing that. And then later on, when I got older, because there were always survival people, but they were survivalists, and it was kind of frowned on. It was sort of a negative term. Yeah. And Hollywood and print and things like that, they would really make fun of people. They were all the crazy survivalists out in like Idaho, were doing all this nutty stuff. Yeah. And but then later on, it kind of became a little more mainstream, and then the prepping thing has sort of become a little more normalized. Right. But it doesn't take much to realize that if you go through a crisis, there is a progression. It doesn't matter if it's a war, a pandemic, an attack by an enemy, or a drought or a flood. You still end up needing food, water, shelter, protection from other people, as well as animal predators. So everything that happens, it all ends up the same place. You have to be prepared for it. So like I said, if it's going to rain and you've got an umbrella, let it come down. So
that's right. You're going to stay dry. In the metaphorical sense as well. So, you talk about survivalist and prepping. They're different, but a similar end goal.
Much crossover. Yeah. A whole lot of crossover. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, you're prepping to survive. So they're definitely interlinked and connected. Right. It's just that the whole self-reliance survival thing, eventually this is where you have to realize if it goes long enough, if you've got 3 months of food put back and the crisis lasts for 6 months, you're going to be hungry for 90 days. So the idea behind the survival is that once we run out of things that we have purchased, then we can repurpose things. And that's, like why I make things out of tin cans. Yeah. So after you eat your food, what can I do with this can? There's, 100 uses. So, being able to repurpose. Actually, interestingly enough, I'm not sure if it was in Nevada or not, but in one of the old mining towns, a guy took this can and he cut both ends out of it and then cut it or melted the solder. They don't use solder in these anymore. They're welded, but he flattened it out and used them as shingles. And he shingled the whole roof of his cabin using just tin cans that would have ordinarily been in the dump.
There you go. And that was an original tin roof.
Yeah, it really was. And it didn't cost him anything more than a little bit of time and that's it. Hard work.
Very clever. Very clever. Well, I think one of the first places I'm going to go if the SHTF, I'll save the colorful language. I'm going to the dump.
We just say something hits the fan.
Something hits the fan. Thank you, Reverend. Something hits the fan. Yeah, I'm going to the dump because there's so much good stuff probably waiting there. That you could be very, very smart with. I've got a couple things with me, and I want to also in just a few minutes you're going to show us something pretty special in how to make a stove. I believe with some tin cans. But I've got a couple things in my pocket because there's a lot of things that we don't see purposes for outside of what they were intended for, designed for, right? And this goes back to you being the MacGyver of survivalists. And so I've got three things here, and I just want to get your thoughts on what else you could use these things for. So the first is chapstick. Okay. Chapstick. It goes on my lips. What else could I use this thing for?
All right. So when you're out in the backcountry, a lot of times your knife will want to get rusty. So you can rub that on your knife blade, and that wax will help preserve it and keep it from rusting. You can also use it on a sticky zipper, like your tent or your pants or your jacket. Sometimes those zippers get where they won't zip up and down, so you can use it on your zipper. I I actually have a video on this on my YouTube channel. I don't know if you've watched it or not, but it's 7 survival uses for chapstick.
I might have.
So you can stick a wick in it and it burns like a candle. You can also use it for once the tube is empty. It's a great storage tube. A lot of times people will clean them out using some paper towel or toilet paper and roll up a few 20s and stick it inside. And it's a really great little pocket. Most people are not going to think to rob you of your chapstick. Right. They're not going to be looking for money in that. And so, chapstick can be used if you get scalded between your thighs from a long hike. Yes. And you need something for a little lubrication. I would definitely use it between my legs before I use it on my lips, because obviously, that's kind of an issue. But so there's a lot of things like that chapstick can be used for.
I love it. All right, so here's number 2. Now, this is, unfortunately, somehow I got a hole in this, but this is about a 12 by 12 piece of aluminum foil that I had folded up, and I actually keep in my wallet. Mm-hmm. What do I do with this?
Okay. Well, first of all, about the hole, that's one problem with aluminum foil. Once you fold it up and it creases, those creases are going to weaken and stretch that spot. So they sometimes can get holes in them where the creases are. So once you pull it out and start using it, don't just keep folding it up over and over, because your piece will fracture. It'll get into smaller pieces.
I'm there.
Yes. So, and the other thing that you can do with your aluminum foil, this is a little bit off base, but if you go to the store and get those mini loaf pans, made of aluminum foil, you could take and fold the ends in, bend the sides over, fold it in half, and roll it with a rolling pin. You could end up with an actual pan that fits in your pocket.
Oh, nice.
And it's fairly thick aluminum, so it's a little more durable.
Yeah.
So I've used those in a lot of my survival kits.
Okay.
You have to be very careful opening them, again, because you're stressing those folds.
Yeah.
So you can use it to make a vessel for boiling water, for cooking things. A lot of people cook stuff in aluminum foil. You can use it as a signaling device. It's very bright and reflective, so you can hold it up and catch the sunlight for rescuers. You can snip off pieces of it and attach it to a fishing line to attract fish as a lure. You can, of course, use it to reflect heat. If you're trying to protect, say, you've got a pan that you found in the city dump and it has a plastic handle and you don't want to melt it over your fire, you wrap your aluminum foil around that plastic handle.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Actually, in my video on burns, common table mustard. You put the mustard on the burn, then you wrap it with aluminum foil. It has something to do with the transfer of negative and positive ions. And the aluminum, along with the mustard, of course, you don't want to use hot mustard. You don't want to make it worse. But just like French's or one of the mustard. Common table, just common, plain, cheap table mustard. And then wrap that with aluminum foil. Also, the aluminum foil, because it's metal, as it's in contact with your skin, it will help transfer heat. So it keeps the burn a little cooler than without it. So, there's a ton of stuff for aluminum foil.
Okay, so that was number 2. So here's the last one that I have. This is something that is I guess it's getting phased out. Everywhere that you go in grocery stores, this used to be the rage, right? Moving from paper to plastic. I remember I was a bag boy at the end of a grocery aisle or a grocery checkout, and people were at one time kind of upset, like, oh man, I want the paper back. And like, no, we're doing plastic. It's just so much cheaper. It's better, blah, blah, blah. And now it's going the other way. But so there's a lot of these things around. It's interesting. Please reuse or recycle. It even says, so how could I reuse this?
Well, if you have a small child, you can slip one of the loops over each arm and it makes a little improvised backpack.
Wow.
Now it's not big enough for an adult, but let's say you're hiking somewhere and you have just, it weighs, grams. So the child's you're not going to carry a huge amount, but let's say you're carrying a teddy bear or maybe a half bottle of water or something like that, it makes them, they can have a backpack. If you tear the handles off, you can take those and tie each one of those handles around the guy lines of your shelter to keep you from tripping over the guy lines, and you still have the bag. So you're just using the handles off of it. You can, if it was a clear plastic, you could put it around a branch or a limb and you could get, a little bit of water from transpiration, from the moisture in the tree. Of course, we used to carry water. You could make an improvised shower. You could use it filled with water, and you would make a bag from one corner, spin it around to tighten it up, kind of like you'd see like you're going to decorate a cake, and put a hole in the corner and use it to irrigate a wound. If you need to clean up with pressure, so you get a little bit of force. Of course, you use potable water for that.
Yeah. Those are great. I mean, this is why people need to go to Waypoint Survival and check out your videos, both on YouTube, and I don't know if on your website you've also got videos or not, but YouTube.
There's a link to the YouTube channel.
Yeah, man. I mean,
and I'm on Facebook as well.
Okay.
So I post my videos to Facebook, and I'm also on Instagram.
Right on. So
it's all Waypoint Survival,
and it's just about opening your mind, and there's probably so many people that have died, and if they had just thought differently about what they had with them and their surroundings, they probably could have made it through those situations. I don't have any stories about that, but
so I have one for you really quick. So you're familiar with the Continental Divide?
Yes.
So there's the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. One side goes to the east, one side goes to the west. Well, back in the 1930s or 40s, there was a pilot who crashed on the California coast. And they knew he was missing. They searched and searched and searched. They found him. It was, I don't remember the exact details. It was 10 or 11 days later, but he had died from dehydration. And if he had known one simple survival trick, he could have survived. How do you find fresh water at the beach? Everybody knows if you dig down at the beach into the sand, you'll hit salt water. Okay. If you go back behind the first line of dunes and you dig down, you get fresh water. Because the water from the continent is flowing toward the ocean. So you're in elevation above sea level. So assuming there's enough moisture in the ground and you're not in extreme drought, that there is some water flowing to the ocean, you should be able to dig, sometimes known as a coyote well.
Okay.
And you should be able to get fresh water if you go back. So, literally just a few hundred feet from where he died, he probably could have found fresh water. So that's one of the reasons why they started doing survival training for pilots. And they went over to the Bedouins in the Middle East and people that, had all this experience living in extreme conditions. And they said, we want you to train our pilots in desert survival. And the Bedouins said, well, we don't know anything about survival. We just live here.
Exactly. That is survival. Yeah, we are blessed. We are blessed. Well, so I just have a couple other quick questions, and then I want to let you do the demo, but I know we want to move the camera and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I was just amazed. Speaking of gear, I was looking at your gear list for your survival and bushcraft phase 1, and you had a list of things on here. Everything from wire coat hanger. These are things that people have to bring with them. And then you had nice little links to Amazon or other places that they could find these things. Wire coat hanger, can of pork and beans or chili and can opener, spoon cup, a wool blanket, 80% wool, a tarp, non-insulated metal canteen, a knife, folding saw, a fire rod, a little bit of paracord, duct tape, garbage bags, headlamp. So this is what you need to have in your kit.
Right.
Okay. So magnifying glass, ground mat. So this is a great resource. If you go to waypointsurvival.com gear list, it's all right there. And you show people how to use all this stuff in survival bushcraft situation.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the basic idea behind the gear list, is that once you take the phase 1 class, that you are at least ready for a 72-hour scenario. You could push that out to a week because basically once you get your water and shelter, you can go 30 days without food. Most people can without any real ill effects, unless they have medical issues. But so once you get your priorities straightened out for the most important things. So sometimes, like for instance, if you have a broken leg, you would need to stabilize that first. There's some priorities that need to come first, and we teach prioritization just like they do in hospitals. You triage the worst patients and get them taken care of first. So we do that in survival too. We look at our situation and say, what happened? So there might be a time when if I'm way up north and it's really, really cold, but it's not raining or snowing, my first priority might be fire. Right. Whereas if it's going to rain or snow on me or ice, my first priority would be shelter. I'm not so worried about starting a fire as I am staying shelter. So I tell people it's easier to stay warm and dry than it is to get warm and dry.
There you go. That's
so
very practical.
Yeah. So prioritize your needs. So all of the items on the gear list are specifically we bring you on, we show you how to use the stuff, how to improvise things using those items. And then, basically once you take my class, you'll never want to be without a garbage bag in your kit.
They are so useful for sure. Absolutely. I have 2 or 3 in my backpack because they're super light and
yes,
they're so useful in every situation. But if you had to rank your top 3 things in the spirit of prioritization, because that list is probably about 30 things, and it's great. You're going to show people how to use all those things, and they're just common everyday things, right? Just like chapstick and the tinfoil that we're talking about and other things. But what would be your top 3 that you would have to have with you? So
basically, depending on your skill level, and this is why it's so important to get training. When a crisis happens, you will never rise to the level of your expectations. You will always fall to the level of your training. That's important to remember. So if you have no training, you can fall away to the bottom and die. There's nothing to fall back on. You don't have the experience. And just because you watch something on YouTube doesn't make you an expert. There's a big difference between doing something yourself and watching someone else do it. So the 3, very simple, the ability to cut things, the ability to start a fire, and some sort of a container to purify and carry water. So the knife, the ferro rod, and the single-walled stainless steel canteen with a lid. Of course, it's plastic usually, so you have to take the lid off to boil water. But that way you can boil water to purify it. You can use a T-shirt. You can use a sock to filter out the heavy turbidity from the leaves and sticks and debris. And then put that in the fire, boil it, pull it out using a stick or 2 as a handle. And if you take a branch of a tree that has a fork on one side, so kind of like this,
sure.
And if it's springy and wide enough, you can stick it down inside the bottle and pull it up without using anything like a pot holder or a glove.
Brilliant.
So it goes because you just push it down in, so the bottom fits down inside, collapses, and then that little twig on the end pops out and catches under the lip, and then you can lift that hot bottle aside and let it cool down. So that's kind of bushcraft. That's the things that we do for always make sure that you use a plant that is not toxic.
Good idea.
Like there's a lot of things out there that like elderberry, for instance. Elderberries are great for syrups, and you can eat the leaves, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the flowers, and of course the berries. But the actual stem is toxic.
Unbelievable.
And so it's a real hollow, great little pithy center, and kids have hollowed them out to make straws or blowguns or whistles and stuff, and you get very sick and really hurts you. So, it's a little bit of plant identification. So you want to use, in our areas, we have a lot of hardwood. So you'd want to use, hickory or maple or, something like that isn't going to make you sick in your boiling water when you pull up your pot. The same thing goes for roasting hot dogs or cooking anything over an open fire. Make sure that the wood that you use isn't going to kill you or make you really sick because you're just worsening your situation.
Yeah.
So something to cut with. So preferably a good solid knife with a full tang, so the metal goes all the way end to end. Probably a ferrocerium rod with a striker attached, because I always, I have my striker attached to it, so I don't have to use the back of my knife. And so if I've got my ferro rod, I've got my striker, so I don't have to use the knife for that. Because every time you pull your knife out of the sheath, you take a chance on cutting yourself or someone else. You could drop it. You could damage the blade. You could lose it, especially if you're over water. So you want to leave that knife in the sheath as much as possible, just to keep it secure. So a knife, your ferrocerium rod, and then that stainless steel container so that you can collect, boil and purify water, put the lid on it after it cools, and then take it with you as you're going from place to place. All the other stuff you can easily figure out. And you can actually make all of that stuff from resources that you find. And that's what we get into the primitive stuff, is if you have only your bare hands, how do you make a knife? How do you make a container? How do you, make fire? So.
Wow, that is something else. Those are great. I'm going to make that adjustment right now. I think I've got probably 2 of 3, and I need to get 3 of 3 on that. But that's awesome. Thank you. I'll tell you, I think it is about time, if you don't mind. I would love to see this demonstration. You're going to give our viewers a real treat and show us a little bit about how you can, I guess, cook things using just ordinary objects that we would never even be thinking about. So, yeah.
So since this is nutrient survival, I said a podcast and we're really promoting the company. One of the things you need to be able to do is you can eat freeze-dried food cold. You could just put water in it, let it set for a while, and it is edible. But there's nothing like a hot meal to make you feel civilized. Honestly, it's just so much better because we're used to hot food.
We are, yeah.
And so the problem, though, is being able to start a fire if you don't have, if you don't have propane, if you don't have electric. How do I cook things? And of course, the other problem is if you're in a place like California, like some of the areas that are just tinder dry. A spark in the wrong direction and you've got a raging inferno that can just destroy homes and properties and millions of acres. So the reason we use these cans is because we're able to contain the fire inside of a metal object. It contains the fire, it contains the ashes, and we refer to these as twig stoves.
Okay.
So they're not for a great big huge fire. This is just a standard, little soup can. You can scale this up all the way to a number 10 can, you get like the big, large cans of survival food.
That's what we saw.
So this very, very same concept. So this is small. And what's really cool about this is a 0.5 liter bottle of water. So 16.9 ounces, right? Will nest perfectly inside of this.
Okay.
So if I'm going along the road, I can find a can and I can find a bottle. I now have a canteen and a cook set.
Oh, that's brilliant.
All right. But you do want to burn out the inside because there's a plastic, used to be BPA, but they don't hardly use BPA anymore. Right. But there is a plastic coating inside of these cans to keep them from rusting. So before you cook in it or boil water, you want to put it in the fire and make sure you burn out all that coating. All right.
Yes.
So just important to know because you don't want getting all those chemicals leached into your food or water.
Well, that's a great reminder. I worked for Campbell Soup for a long time, and you're absolutely right. We put an epoxy liner in there, and so that it prevented the rust. And a lot of people complain about tinny taste and whatnot over time, and that's really something that is from the older cans before we had more sophisticated epoxy linings. And yeah, you're right. We've for the most part, I think it's difficult to find those epoxies with BPA, but they are still toxic. If you're going to turn that thing into a stove, you're going to pick up some of that chemical in whatever's inside that can.
Right. So your first burn should probably be without water on top or without food on top. So you put your twigs in and you get it good and hot and you burn out all that stuff. And then you dump the ashes in a safe place, put some water on it. And then your next burn then can be of your food without worrying all that toxic smoke coming up around your food.
Yeah. Delicious.
But it's a simple thing. And a lot of people too, I always tell them, they punch a couple holes in the can and set it in the fire. Well, you're getting the very same thing. All that heat is causing those chemicals to leach into your food. Yeah. Now, would I do it in a real survival situation? Yeah, probably. If I ended up with 2 cans and one wasn't empty, I would either eat the first one cold and then use it as a container in a stove later, or I would heat it in the fire because you can do something once or twice. It's probably not going to hurt you long term. But if I had a whole bunch of cans, I wouldn't make a practice of going out camping, and my preferred method is just set the can in the fire. They did that years ago, and even back then they used to use lead solder. So that was actually a really bad idea too, because you could get that into your food. So yeah. So.
Okay. Well, very good. Thank you. Awesome. That's a great tip. Yeah, and I guess if you're poking holes in the bottom of that can, you're also going to lose the ability to hold water and other things that you may want to cook up later. So that's a consideration. Like you said, if you're able to achieve the same objective and heat the food or whatever you're looking to warm up and cook, you don't need to poke holes in the bottom of the can because that just loses some of the functionality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So fortunately, there's going to be a lot of cans around. So
okay.
I think it'll be a few decades before we run out of cans.
I think so too. Absolutely. Especially if you stock up from Nutrient Survival. We'll square you away with that number 10 can size.
Right.
So James, did you want to show us a demo?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me move over here, get the camera set up, and
all right.
Just a second here. All right. So just using a standard Sharpie here, what we're going to do with this can is, and I might want to raise this up just a little bit. All right. So we're going to take this. This is actually a Milwaukee Inkzol, but it's made for marking on metal. A regular Sharpie will do. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this can. I'm doing all this upside down, so hopefully I'll get it right. We want to leave a little bit of space at the bottom. So we're going to make a mark here, and then we're going to come up part of the way, not real far. We're going to leave a few ribs at the top. So if you can kind of see that, how that's marked.
Right.
All right. And then we want to mark this can. We're going to make 8 marks all the way around. And how I like to do it is I like to start right in the center of my opening. So here's the square, and there's one right here. And then I'll go directly to the back, and I'll make another one. So right here.
Now you're just eyeballing all this.
Yeah, this is not rocket science. It's not even a rocket stove. and then we'll make a mark over here. And again, we're just going opposite sides. And again, we're just eyeballing it. Like I said, there's nothing special. And then once I get my 4 marks, kind of equidistant all the way around, then I'll go ahead and put some marks in the middle of those.
Okay.
So that we end up with a total of 8.
Okay.
All the way around.
Now the square that you drew, because I imagine you're going to cut some of that. The square that you drew, does that have any particular magic to where that's at relative to the other lines that are at the top of the can?
Yeah, so you want to leave a little bit of integrity between the top line. So you need a little bit of space here so that the can doesn't collapse, and it'll make a lot more sense once I get it cut out.
So if you draw that square, if you draw a line at the top that is right in the middle, then that's a nice little mark
at the bottom rib.
Right.
Okay, so we're leaving this part intact because that's going to hold our ashes. That will help keep them from spilling out on the ground.
Okay.
I mean, some will a little bit, but I try to find a sandy spot or a rock or a piece of bare ground where you're not going to start something on fire. But yeah, it's best to contain the ashes, at least on one side.
Great.
and this will make more sense once I get it done. So once you get that, and again, you're just eyeballing it. I don't want it to go all the way around to the outside. So it might be 25% of the can as you look at the overall size. Maybe 25 to 30. I don't know. I'm just guessing because it's kind of a simple project. Next thing you want to get some sort of a nail, a hammer. Now you can use a rock. You can also use a multi-tool to do this that has like an awl or a punch. These cans are very thin. They're very easy to puncture. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a hole at each corner.
Okay.
All right. And you'll probably bend the can up a little bit, but that's all right.
Okay.
You can always put it back in shape when you're done with it.
I would have hit my thumb about 4 times by now.
I used to be a carpenter for about 15 years.
All right.
So that doesn't mean I won't hit my thumb, but generally speaking, I generally don't.
Okay. You were able to puncture all 4 of those.
Yeah, I got the bottom 2 a little more accurately than the top.
All right.
So I'll work from there.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I've got these are Fisker's snips, and I like them because they have a really nice point. And then what we do is we take and we start here. And before I go any farther, I have some gloves.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, well, I brought them on purpose. And a lot of times people will say something to me. They'll say, you shouldn't do that. I usually do this without gloves. But
I know. I've seen your videos. You're very handy and careful. I don't know how you don't cut yourself.
Well, my hands are really tough. Yeah. So from working a lot. So basically, once you get this started, and you just work your way up, and I'll try to do this quickly. You can edit this out if you want. It's kind of loud. Okay, so here's what I've done.
Nice.
So I've cut just the top 3 sides. So I leave the bottom one intact. The reason I draw the line is to give me a reference point for the top line, to know how wide that is. But I don't cut the bottom. You can, but it kind of ruins the idea here, because what we're doing is we're going to take this And I'm just going to bend this out. See, that makes a little shelf. And that way my sticks can lay on top of it. So that makes, I can use longer sticks then, because they will smolder and tend to fall out otherwise. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our snips and we're going to cut. We don't want to cut down into the ribbing if we can help it. So we're just this smooth part. I'm sure in the can factory there's a name for that, but it's the unribbed part.
Okay.
And so again, we just take the snips, and this little lip's a little hard to get through, but you get where you can do it pretty good. All right. So there we have, as you can see, we have this done like so. And then the last thing we want to do is we go to the very back, right opposite where this shelf is, and we take what we call a church key. Okay. The can opener on one side, bottle opener on the other. Mm-hmm. And we place it in here, and we put one right in the center, and then put one on each side of that. And those are air holes. That's so that the air can come in at the bottom.
Yeah.
Then at the top, all we do is we fold every other one in. So we fold this one in, and this one, and this one, and this one. Mm-hmm. And what that does is that focuses the flame. And so what we end up with is something that looks like this. So we can feed the sticks in here, and then we can set our pot on top, and there's a little bit for the flame to come out. And then, so it kind of focuses the flame, and but then gives us a really good burn. So this is just a really quick way to make an improvised stove.
Awesome. Awesome. So quick and easy. And you make it look just like, wow. Well, James Bender, Waypoint Survival, thank you again. It's been so educational, so informative, so practical, giving people the training, the confidence that they can survive through any situation. I have on my personal list how I find a way to get out and take part in some of your training, because I know you teach me a heck of a lot, and I have a lot more to learn. But for folks that are in your neck of the woods and want to come visit you, what's the best way to get a hold of you and participate?
Sure. Waypointsurvival.com. You can go on there. You can email. You can contact me. I do answer my emails, and I always look forward to hearing from people. And of course, the website as well as the YouTube channel, but Instagram, Facebook, Waypoint Survival. Right on.
And the YouTube channel is all free, of course. And like you said, don't just watch the video. You got to put it into practice as well. But it's been great talking to you, James. And we wish you the very best. Thank you for spending time with us and being such an advocate for what we do as well. God bless you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.